With 38 coastal and island states and a coastline of over 47,000 kilometers, Africa has an enormous opportunity for the continent to develop the sectors typically associated with the blue economy. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development says that with efficient management, the sustainable exploitation of resources in oceans, seas, lakes, and rivers, also known as the blue economy, could contribute up to $1.5 trillion to the global economy. Cyrus Rosmoji, a blue economy expert and a senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation, has said that expanding fisheries, aquaculture, tourism, exploration, transportation, and maritime and inland ports can help reduce Africa's poverty and enhance food and energy security, employment, economic growth, and exports, ocean health, and sustainable use of ocean resources as well. Securing the blue economy encourages better stewardship of ocean resources and can play a critical part in strengthening maritime security through enhancing resilience, especially from factors that drive communities to engage in maritime crimes. For example, in Kenya, you have fishing communities along many coastlines that have been organized into beach management units, and they've displayed the potential and willingness to contribute to the protection of ocean resources, as they are not only direct beneficiaries of the blue economy, but stand to have their livelihoods disrupted by maritime insecurity. Today, we're looking at the blue economy with a special focus on East Africa. This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulope. Adeleru-Balogun. Welcome. And joining me on the show today is Satchu. He's an Africa Geo-economist and macro analyst and the CEO of Rich Management. Welcome to Business Edge once again. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So let's sort of separate this conversation, because a bit of the pressure that African economies are having now to look for new resources and new avenues of revenue is coming from the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's sort of do a pre and a post. So before the COVID-19 pandemic came about, what were we seeing? What were the things we were seeing happening and developing along with the blue economy in East Africa?
So, there's definitely been a push that preceded the COVID epidemic to develop the blue economy. This has been one of the presidents here in Kenya. The president has been very keen to make progress in this area. There's been greater coordination with states which are on the sea, and there's been a big effort to try and monetize the blue economy more effectively. I think the story in Africa really is pretty much the same all over the continent. It is a blue sky opportunity. We're not monetizing it sufficiently. We're allowing other external players access to our resources for peanuts. And it's high time we actually took control back of the sea. And I think, you were mentioning the opportunity. It's a $1 trillion opportunity if we get it right. And I think there seems to be a lot more momentum to do something about it.
So do you think that momentum is coming now because COVID-19 has made it much more crucial for African states to find a way to fully utilize their natural resources, to find themselves out of the recessions and shrinking economies they've had, or because it's just a natural progression in time that we might expect?
No, I think counterintuitively, the COVID epidemic has focused minds and has focused governments on the need to increase the revenue take. This is low-hanging fruit that's been there for a very long time. And I think, therefore, there's fresh impetus to try and exploit it in a sustainable manner. So I think it's a mixture of both the points you are making there. But definitely, it's a very big opportunity. And it's surprising it's taken us so long to see it in front of us.
Okay. So there are an estimated more than 200 million people who live in the Western Indian Ocean region, and about 60 million of them living about 100 kilometers or less from the ocean. When you look at East Africa and the economic opportunities for the blue economy there, what are you seeing? What are some of the big opportunities for countries to take advantage of?
So first of all, from a macro perspective, I think the center of gravity is shifting towards the Indian Ocean. You're talking about a total of 3 billion people who live on that Indian Ocean if you go all the way around, past India and so forth. So it is, if you think of it from the topography of the ocean, it's an enormous economy. Interestingly, this economy has been there for many centuries, primarily because of the reversible monsoon winds, which could take you from as far away as Macau all the way to the south of Mozambique, and then the wind would turn around and you could go all the way back. So it has a historical story behind it, which is very interesting as well. But I think today you're looking at this opportunity in the ocean, you're looking at this economy, and then you're looking at, you're looking at fisheries, which is obviously a very big opportunity. You're looking at, the challenge around maritime security, because you can't exploit the sea unless you have a degree of security over the sea. And that's been a big challenge for East Africa, right? Because of particularly coming out of Somalia, where you've had all those hijackings, and it made it very difficult for anyone to get any insurance. So I think it's a great opportunity. I think there are a lot of people who are waiting to exploit it. And I think countries need to just create a level playing field and make sure that they are incentivizing people appropriately. You touched on, this sort of very grassroots effort in Kenya, which is from people who live by the beach, trying to sustain the ocean that way. So I think it's a mixture of these small-scale, grassroots-driven efforts, but also you've got to create infrastructure. So, for example, if you're going to get into fishing, you've got to have the processing a bit piece there. You're looking at other opportunities. This oil pipeline going from Uganda to Tanga. So you've got, the movement of natural resources out and in. There are multiple opportunities, and you've just got to create the right architecture. Some of it, the capex will be quite high.
Yeah. Okay, so before we go for a break, I want us to talk a bit more about these challenges. And you've mentioned, of course, the maritime security issue that you had with Somalia, particularly with the combined piracy. But it's not just that. Another one of the obstacles we've sort of seen pop up is this conversation around maritime boundary disputes that happen between countries. Now, we saw the Kenya and the Somalia one that was over a contested 160,000 kilometers that eventually made it to the International Court of Justice. There's been a judgment. We're not sure if Kenya is going to hold to the deals of that judgment. But when you look at something like that, 160,000 kilometers of a boundary that's being disputed, that translates to money when it comes to, in fact, who is controlling it, who is taking the revenue from it, the taxes from it, and things like that. How big of an issue do you think maritime boundary disputes could be as we look to see more African countries try to play in this blue economy space?
So yeah, you're completely right, actually. That has been a serious challenge for Kenya and for Somalia. And there are potential ripple effects from whatever the outcome is. At the moment, the international maritime law seems to be supporting the Somalia position. And Kenya has taken an interesting stance. It's basically saying it's not going to adhere to any outcome from that court, which is wrong, given that they propose to go to the very same court. You can't then not accept an outcome because you don't like it. But just think if Kenya's application was successful, then you would have to adjust all the boundaries of the countries to the south of us. Similarly, you'd have to do the same thing for Tanzania, and it would have a very big ripple effect. So yes, I think in these sorts of scenarios, you can see in the oil and gas sector, no one is, although there are some people who've taken a punt, it seems, and that's part of the problem. But, serious investors are not going to invest with that kind of uncertainty around the boundary situation. So it's a very interesting question to ask. And I think, it needs something, an intervention at the AU level to try and bring some good order into that, because otherwise we're just going to be stuck in the slow lane.
And we'll talk about the AU in the second half of this conversation, because they have an agenda that involves the blue economy. But there's one other aspect I want us to get into before we go for a break, and that's the fisheries. What we're seeing across many African coastal waters now is that the space is overfished, and you have small artisanal family fishing trolleys who are trying to fight for space and some kind of, revenue with these big trolleys that typically go to the international boundary, and we see them go to international farms and international waters. What do we do in that aspect? Because the fishing part has to be sustainable. These are livelihoods that have existed in many of these places for hundreds of years. It needs to be also able to make money for the local people, not just those international trawlers that come in. So the fishing aspect is also a major problem. What are we seeing with East Africa? How is that being addressed?
So, look, this is a problem. That's not only an East African one. It's a problem. We heard about the fish rot scandal in Namibia.
Yes.
In West Africa, the same problem is happening. And it's coming down to a very simple thing that, a couple of things. Firstly, our bureaucrats are basically biddable for very small amounts. Fish rot is a classic example. And they're giving away hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue for a few $1 million in their pockets. So that's one thing we've got to address, and we've got to be open and frank about it. Then we've got to exert control over our fishing waters. So we've got to be able to stop people coming into those waters. And I think that, it's now a matter of some urgency, because otherwise there'll be nothing left. And I think from the perspective of the local artisanal fisher people, it's absolutely critical. This is a sustainable part of the whole fisheries business. If we can empower them, I think there's a very big opportunity. So I would say, look, we've got to regain control over our fishing areas and the rights that we control as countries. We've then got to stop a lot of these international fishing folks coming in. And then we've got to be able to put our own boats into the water and then incentivize our local artisanal fisher people.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to take a break now, Ali, and when we come back, we'll get into the EU part of this conversation. So in 2013, I beg your pardon, the AU, the African Union's Peace and Security Council, described maritime security and the blue economy as the new front line of Africa's renaissance. The AU Commission included maritime issues in its Agenda 2063, making the creation of blue economies in secure African waters essential to its achievement. However, the AU's maritime security efforts have been beset with major structural obstacles. Departments and agencies have struggled to secure a solid institutional anchorage and sufficient budget allocation for maritime strategy implementation. So what is the way forward? The conversation will continue after this break. And still with me is Ali Khan Satchu, Africa Geo-economist and macro analyst, as we look at the blue economy with a special focus on East Africa. Now, in March of 2021, Kenya launched Blue, or rather Go Blue, an initiative that seeks to protect the country's coastal ecosystem while creating jobs in recycling, tourism, and small-scale fishing. Already has received a €25 million grant from the EU. So, Ali, let me ask you now, how far is it with the Go Blue initiative? Is it something that has really kicked off in the past few, let's just say, months? It's not even up to a year now. So how is it going with that?
I think it's not going badly, actually. They've made a number of efforts. It's more, I would call it small scale, high impact interventions that they're looking to create. For example, there was no refrigeration in Lamu. So they've given them refrigeration so they could store their catches and sell them in the future. There is an investment going into a fish processing unit between Mombasa and Malindi. So yes, I think 25 million euros isn't a big game changer, but it's, I think, some seed capital, and definitely they're making some sensible seed investments with that money. But really, I think the dream is much bigger than that. But this is a good starting point.
So given that Kenya is East Africa's largest economy, they seem to be going this alone. But one of the final questions I'm going to also ask is, no one African country can do this by themselves. Would you expect Kenya to sort of bring other East African countries into the loop with this kind of initiative?
Absolutely, and I think bigger than that, the loop should be Pan-Africa-wide, with all the maritime countries getting involved. And I think that's why the AU has a significant role to play. I think near term, yes, I would like to see Kenya, Tanzania, Somalia all start to integrate their ideas and programs effectively. So yes, most definitely, because a lot of these investments might actually turn out to be, cover not just Kenya, but other countries as well. For example, partly related, the Tanzanians are building storage facilities in Mombasa for surplus food so that they can keep it there for the times when Kenya's market needs it. So, those sorts of investments are also, I think, part of the bigger picture for the blue economy, the ports, and the infrastructure that you need to build in order to really get this thing off the ground.
Okay, so talking about what we need to build, when you look at East Africa in particular, tourism, fishing, trade, transport, ports, renewable energy, mining, and energy as it is, where do you think the focus could be? Because it's not a situation where countries would be able to attack or at least identify and address all these things at one time. There has to be a priority listing. There has to be a long-term plan, medium and short term. Where do you think the focus should go?
So that's a great question and quite a wide-ranging one. I think, look, I would look at things like return on investment. If you're looking at return on investment, you're naturally going to be looking at things like energy, deep sea mining. But these are very expensive, high capex investments. You can see the challenges, for example, Tanzania has been facing, but now seems to be pushing through those challenges with the gas exploitation from the sea. Mozambique, of course, is, the challenges that they've had. So those are the very big things which are going to be transformative, potentially, billion-dollar earners. But at the same time, I think you can't forget our communities, and I would put them on a par. If you want to create sustainable economies on our coastlines, you can't ignore the people who live there, the fisher people who are there. They are big in tourism. They're supporting the tourism industry. So I think you've also got to look at those people as to how you're going to deliver sustainable and improving incomes at the ground. And I think if you do that successfully, then you're going to win across the board. So that's where I would be looking at. Of course, ports has been, front and center for a long time. I'm not worried about investment coming into our ports. It seems that there's a lot of interest and a lot of money around for that. Lamu Port is an example. We need to keep upscaling our capacity, but at the moment it seems to be going at the right pace. And then, the basic infrastructure you need around storage, more efficient processing in and out of the port. And of course, transportation. I mean, I was in, for example, Istanbul, and you can just jump on a ferry and there are hundreds of them. Whereas if you look at somewhere like this part of the world, if I wanted to go by sea from Lamu to Zanzibar, it's not that easy. There isn't an infrastructure. So I think there's another very big opportunity in the transportation side to interconnect a lot of places. 10 years ago, everyone said you couldn't fly to small towns and cities in Africa. There wasn't an economic rationale for it. Today, you've got multiple airlines flying between all kinds of new points. And I think the same thing could happen with sea transportation if we put our minds to it.
All right, so let's touch on the AU as we start wrapping things up. So the AU Integrated Maritime Strategy has set 2050 as a target date for the framework implementation of the blue economy. But after receiving significant and sufficient signatures, neither the revised African Maritime Transport Charter nor the African Charter on Maritime Security and Safety Development in Africa have attained enough signatures and, of course, ratification for them to come into force. And then you have a conversation also, many people will tell you, let's be honest, African countries have a host of issues they need to deal with. Many of us have not even fully utilized the resources that we have on ground, on land, before we now start asking for investments and money to go into resources that are on the sea or involving ocean and the water. Is this really a nice to have idea, or is this an idea whose time has come and Africa has to get on board? African countries need to do this now before we lose out.
So I think it's the second. I think we have to get on board, and I think we've got to do it in a structured way, and I think in a Pan-African way, and I think therefore the vehicle for doing it at scale is going to be the African Union, in order to do all those things which are difficult for countries to do themselves, create enforcement mechanisms, create a level playing field, help in legislation, all that kind of thing. I mean, this is not a small, this economy, you know, if you're talking about $1 trillion opportunity, that's 1/3 of Africa's GDP. It's a big deal. So I think it needs high-level steering in terms of how everyone operates, setting the rules of the road, and then capturing the opportunity. I think it's going to be very difficult for individual countries to do this at the right scale. And therefore, you know, they need to be able to rely on core expertise, which I think has to come out of the African Union.
All right, so we'll leave the conversation at that, even though there's a whole year ahead of us. And by the end of the year, if we're reviewing investments and things that have happened, we hope to see some success in line with the blue economy across the continent. Alikan Satchu, thank you as always.
Thank you.
All right. And I think it's important to end a conversation such as this with numbers. Now, out of Africa's 54 countries, there are 38 coastal and island states. More than 12 million Africans are employed in fisheries alone, the largest of the African blue economy sectors, providing food, security, and nutrition for over 200 million Africans and generating value added estimated at over $24 billion, or 1.26% of the GDP of all African countries. I'll leave you with this. Just imagine the possibilities of expanding the blue economy across the continent. You're watching Business Edge. Up next is NC4 to watch. And these are a few stories we're keeping our eyes on as we wrap things up on this episode of Business Edge. We start in West Africa, where Ghana's sovereign dollar bonds tumbled on Monday after Moody's slashed the country's credit rating, saying it faced an increasingly difficult task of addressing liquidity and debt challenges. The move has been sharply criticized by the government. TradeWeb data showed that bonds issued on international capital markets fell across the curve. The Egyptian Stock Exchange has reported that Macro Group Pharmaceuticals covered a 1.3 billion Egyptian pound, or $83 million retail portion of an initial public offering by 102 times at its close on Monday. Macro Group, a pharmaceuticals and cosmetics company founded in 2002, is selling 45.8% of its shares, of which 95% were offered to investors privately and 5% publicly to retail investors. Namibia is aiming to fast-track the development of its first oil field to have production start by 2026. This follows a significant offshore discovery by Shell. The company said that the exploration well had shown encouraging results with the presence of a working petroleum system with light oil. And finally, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe has ruled out a return to using the US dollar as official currency because there are not enough greenbacks in the country. The financial system is still dominated by the local unit. The Zimbabwean dollar, reintroduced 3 years ago, accounts for 56% of bank deposits, with the balance made up of foreign currency. And that's today's show for you. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Of course, download our mobile app and subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch us on the platforms we are available. We're live on Star Times, Avo TV, and a host of others. Until next time, I'm Tolulope. Adeleru-Balogun. Have a fantastic and profitable day.